we've spent the majority of our conversation about World War I looking at what life was like on the European front. So that trench warfare, the idea of the stalemate, the different battles that were going on at the time. So what we want to focus on during this presentation was life on the home front or in the United States. So the essential or guiding question that I want you to keep in mind throughout this presentation is, what was life like for Americans at home during World War I? And we want to keep in mind that the United States did not join the war effort until the very, very end of things, but we were very, very economically involved with the war. So one of the things that you're going to see during any time of war is the government limiting some civil rights or some civil liberties. We saw that in the Civil War with Abraham Lincoln suspending the right to habeas corpus. People talk about that even today with the war in Iraq and some of the rights that have been suspended of people who are going through trials. So there are three big things I want us to look at. First of all, we've got the Espionage Act. And the Espionage Act forbade actions that stood in the way of the recruitment of the military. So any kind of actions that might have suggested to somebody, hey, listen, it's not a good idea to go fight, those were considered to be illegal. How that shaped up is that materials were removed from the mail. So any kind of flyers or pamphlets that might have been mailed home about how war was bad, those were removed from the mail. And people who wrote those pamphlets had excessive fines or even prison time for writing them. Okay, so we can look at this right now and think, yeah, that's a huge restriction on First Amendment rights. The Sedition Act said that it was a crime to speak out against the purchase of war bonds. And war bonds were one of the big ways that the United States was raising money in order to fight in World War I. Sometimes you see the Espionage and Sedition Acts grouped together as one thing. You'll hear them referred to as the Espionage and Sedition Act, but we're going to look at them as two different entities for the sake of this presentation. Then there's a Supreme Court case, Schenck versus United States. Basically, the decision in this, we were looking at all of this espionage and sedition stuff, okay? How is it allowed? How are we going to allow this stuff to limit our First Amendment? So the Supreme Court actually supported these ideas, okay? And you can see how. It says right here, in ordinary times, the mailing of leaflets would have been protected by the First Amendment. This is the ruling of the Supreme Court. So they said if we weren't in war, it would be okay to have these kinds of leaflets. However, that those people need to be thinking about what they are writing and when they're writing it. So if an act of speech posed a clear and present danger, then Congress has a power to restrain such speech. Okay? So this is just enforcing that idea of having those First Amendment rights kind of really trampled on by a lot of people. So World War I is going to do great things for the American economy. We are going to be supporting Great Britain and France at the beginning of things, both economically and with our pocketbooks. We're going to be giving them money. But we're going to be sending them goods, and sending those goods overseas really, really, really boosted our economy. So you're going to see a couple effects of this. First of all, unemployment virtually disappeared. So in the 1800s, we had a little bit of an economic slump, and we talked about that some with the Industrial Revolution. But during this time, we're going to see the unemployment essentially go away. You're going to see an expansion of this big government. So the idea of capitalism, the idea that the government should really have control of different aspects of the economy. You're going to see excessive government regulations in the economy. And with that came some mismanagement. So people had overlapping jobs or overlapping jurisdictions. You're going to see close cooperation between public, which is the government, and the private sector, which is the businesses, either big or small businesses. And you're going to see unprecedented opportunities for disadvantaged groups. And what we're going to look at right here is the opportunities for African Americans. And we know that after the Civil War and during the times of Reconstruction that African Americans are really, really going to struggle. So it was interesting to see this as early as the 1900s. So Great Migration from 1916 to 1919, you're going to see African Americans moving at a great rate, which was good. It was a good sign of a good economy. People wanted to go look for jobs. You're going to see more and more African Americans working in industries, especially the war industries. And you're going to see the enlistment of African American soldiers that was formally recognized. For one of the first times in history, we talked about those soldiers, African American soldiers during the Civil War some, but these are actually going to be some of our recognized ones. So there are also some interesting amendments passed to our Constitution during this time period. 1919, we see the passing of the 18th Amendment, and that's also known as the Prohibition Amendment, which bans the use of alcohol. You can't drink it, you can't sell it. So we're going to see some primary source documents having to do with this in class tomorrow. And there's a lot of questions as to why anybody would even want to do that. A lot of people believe that it was partly because people felt like we were in a war and we shouldn't be partying as much. And they also kind of were worried about the Germans still at this time. And the Germans did a lot of our alcohol distribution. 1920, we have the 19th Amendment, and the 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote. And a lot of people think that this came along because the women really, really worked hard while the men were fighting in World War I. They were working in the factories. So workers in the war, not all workers supported the war. Obviously, war in general is not usually supported by 100% of the population. And you're going to begin to see some of this organized labor going into effect. You're going to see a coal miners' strike, the steel strike, and the Boston police strike, all of 1919, that come as a result of these workers feeling like that they can speak out more freely. The Selective Service Act of 1917, and this just has really a lot of statistics on it. So 24 million men registered for the draft by the end of 1918, okay? You had to, I think once you turned 18, it might have even been 21, you had to register for the draft. You had to register to be a part of World War I. 4,800,000 men served in World War I. About 2 million of those saw active combat. 400,000 African Americans served in segregated units. 15,000 Native Americans served as scouts, messengers, and snipers, and they were actually in non-segregated units. And then women served in non-combat positions. So this is basically just looking at the different groups of the United States and how they were involved in the actual fighting of World War I. So finally, we're going to look at sort of things that were progressing to help end the war. One of the big things that led us into the war that we didn't talk about in our last presentation was that the U.S. was really, really needed in France because Russia pulled out of World War I. They just decided they were done with it. So we played a key role in stopping the German invasion of France. Second Battle of the Marne marked the point of German withdrawal from France. So Germany is finally going to withdraw from France in 1918. Germany wanted to surrender in October with a piece that was going to be based on the 14 points, and we looked at a little bit of the 14 points a couple of days ago. The United States mostly at this point had contributed food, munitions or weapons, money, oil, and manpower. And one of the big things that led to victory in World War I was that idea that American troops were endless. We had 48 million available troops at the time. That is daunting when you're looking at this after you're a country that's been fighting for years and years and years and you've lost millions of lives. So keep all of this in mind for our classwork tomorrow. It's important that you understand the American involvement in World War I. That's actually primarily what we are supposed to focus on in World War I, but I wanted to make sure that you have the adequate background information as well. So y'all have a great night.